Welcome, everybody. This is the first tent meeting of the Loothing for Dollars, that what we're affectionately calling the Business Roundtable. The subject of today's meeting is pricing. So everybody charge more. Thanks for coming. We'll see you next time.
Back to football.
This is something that we got a bunch of participants in this roundtable. If anybody who is not not on the Loothing roundtable can mute up, that would be great. This is a subject that oh, by the way, we have Ian Davlin joining us today, who when I first started getting involved with the Luth group, one of the most interesting things I heard Ian constantly say to me whenever we would be talking about what kind of content was going to be happening, what he wanted to see have happen. One of the things he kept saying to me during the course of these conversations was, hey, if we can figure out, a way to put a few more dollars in Luth's pockets, then I'll consider what we're doing a success. And that kind of has been from what I've seen, from what Ian has been doing, kind of the guiding principle of what this whole thing has become outside of just a general Luthing organization. So that was the spirit behind when we did the first kind of business chat we did a couple of years ago. That was the spirit of that, and it was met with a fair amount of popularity. And since then, I can honestly say that probably at least 2 to 3 times a week I'll get messages in my DMs or emails from Luths in the Luth group with questions about pricing or about business and stuff like that. And I probably do 1 to 2 one-on-one sessions a week where we're just on the phone or an IG chat, just talking about business. And Ian and I had discussed the necessity for doing something like this more often, but I had to try to figure out how best to do it, because for me to just espouse my opinions was kind of boring to me. Plus, if you've heard everything I have to say about business, then you've heard everything I have to say about business. So I wanted to try to figure out a way to approach this where we did something very similar to what we do during the D&D show, which is bring in a multitude of opinions from different, Luthing walks of life, from different settings, from people who approach things differently. And it's not a matter of trying to convince one or the other of us that we're right and they're wrong, or vice versa, or even convince somebody against their opinion. It's a matter of presenting different ideas so we can all get better at this job that we've all chosen. And so that's the impetus behind what we're doing. So we're going to do one of these kind of business roundtable things, like once a month, once every other month or so. And every time we do it, we're going to pick a different topic and have different people participate, and drill down on a particular subject that affects all of our businesses. And every time we meet, it'll be a different subject, so it'll be a different group of people. So with that in mind, today we've got David Collins from Ann Arbor Guitars in Michigan, who is, as far as I'm concerned, a rock star, because he's somebody who's spent probably as many years doing this as we have, and has thought about it and succeeded in it. And I think I heard him mention once that if you're still doing this that many decades later, you got to be doing something right. So he's gonna present some stuff for us today. Alan Pachter is going to be with us, because Al is what I consider a success story, in the sense that he's somebody who, when I first met him, he was struggling with what to charge, how to feel about charging. And he sorted out a lot of those issues to work for him in a way that I think is fantastic. Plus, We all know that Al is a kind of a dual career person. He's an LCSW, which, if I'm correct, stands for Loothing Certified Social Worker. Is that what that
Yeah,
stands for?
it
Yes.
could in my case. It's licensed clinical social worker, but I like yours better. I might change
So
my
he's not
business model needs to change again.
so he's gonna talk a little bit not only about his pricing stuff, but he's also gonna touch on a bunch of issues that relate to both of the fields that he's currently straddling. And then of course we're gonna have Evan come in at the tail end, and he's gonna make everything that the four of us say make sense, which is Evan is the only person I think that can do that. But
Wow, that's a lot of pressure, Doug.
well,
Use your magic fairy dust.
so the first thing I want to start with is that, as I'm going to go first, and I'm going to present some of my stuff, and it's some of it is a retread of things you've heard me say before if you watch the first business thing. But one of the things I want to say before we get started is that on certain subjects, especially this subject for me, I have some very deeply held convictions about how I run this business and how Sharon and I run this business and approach the business of being in Luthery, that may come off sounding like they're assertive in a way, but I don't mean it that way. It's not like if you don't do it our way, you're doing it wrong. And that I want to make sure is mentioned in the beginning, as in the D&D show. That's the spirit by which we present all of this information, so that you're able to listen to a bunch of different opinions, take from it what makes sense to you, leave the rest by the side of the road, and make your your situation better than it was, hopefully. So in that sense, like I said, we're just when I say something that might sound like it's coming off a touch aggressively, especially when it comes to business, because like I said, I have very strong convictions about certain aspects of this. It doesn't mean that if you're not doing this way, it's some sort of a criticism. So on to talking about pricing. I want to talk about some, as far as I'm concerned, some general principles regarding pricing and regarding doing this for a living. When you're setting your pricing for your work, and this is something I struggled with, as we all do, when we're first starting out, what to charge for this, what to charge for that, how much a given service is worth to you, to the customer. The most important thing that I learned was that my price is my price. I started the same way a lot of us do. Back then there wasn't the internet, so it wasn't as easy as pulling up a dozen different websites and looking what the guy over there charged and what the guy whose price sheet is on his page over there charges. Back then you either had to, have a lot of friends that you would talk with, very much like happens on the Luthalong. We'll be on the Luthalong, and then invariably a day doesn't go by that somebody says, "Hey, Joe, what do you charge for a nut?" "Hey, Bob, what do you charge for a refret?" And when I hear those conversations starting, the hairs on the back of my neck start standing up, because what somebody else charges for something should have nothing to do with what I charge. That's my opinion. And I started off the same way, but back in that day, you used to surreptitiously call the guys in your neighborhood, in your county, in your state, who were doing this, and you would try to sound like a customer, asking for how much a refret was, or asking for how much a setup was, because you're trying to figure out what to charge for your service. And of course, there are lots of variables that go into that. How long you've been doing this, how long the shop that you're calling has been doing it, what their reputation is, and that kind of thing. There were times where I used to have Sharon call and ask for me, and you know, because I would start asking the wrong questions, and I get to a point where when Luths would call me, I could always tell when a Luth was calling me to ask me what a refret price was, because they don't talk like guitar players. You know, they say, yeah, hi, I've got a 1964 Gibson that I need a refret on. I'd like it to have it refretted, and you know, by keeping the nibs, and it's you know, and the nut is this, that, and the other thing, and the size of it. And guitar players don't talk like that. Guitar players call, and they say, "Hi, I got a Gibson ES335, and it buzzes, and it's red." And you know, the notion there is that I could always tell when somebody was calling, asking what my prices were, and they were just somebody else who was another Luth. I stopped doing that early on because I was struggling with the figuring out of how and when and why to do that. And one of the people I used to call a lot and bug, I told a little story up at Northwoods, was Roger Sadowski. And Roger, I would call on occasion to ask him questions about guitars, questions about repairs, if I didn't know how to do something. But very often our conversations would veer off into business. And I remember having a conversation with him where I was very frustrated with knowing what to charge, knowing how to set those rates. And he very jokingly said, "Well, it's easy. Just tell him it's going to be $600 and take 6 months." And I said, "Well, okay." Well, and we were talking about a refret. And this must have been like 92, 93, somewhere about that. I said, "Well, do you mind if I ask you a few more questions?" And he said, "Sure, as long as you don't mind that the answer is going to be charge him $600 and it's going to take 6 months." And as we started talking more about it, he would start giving me more advice. And one of the conversations he had, we were talking specifically about, you know, he was trying to express to me that what I would charge would be different from what somebody else charges, but you know, you got to look in your backyard and see who's charging what and what their experiences related to you was, and we were talking back and forth quite a bit about it. And then he kind of said something as an afterthought, and then moved on to another sentence. And the phrase that he used hit me like a ton of bricks. And it really wasn't even the point that he was trying to make, but it was the point that made the difference for me. Was he had said something to the effect of, "Well, you know," he says, "you know, Doug, you're running a business. You've got, you know, different overhead than that person has. You have, you know, a certain amount of clientele. You might have more work coming in than somebody else." And he says, "You know," he says, "you have a different set of expenses, and it costs a certain amount of money to provide the service that you're providing." And then he went on to talk about something else completely. But that phrase smacked me right in the head, because the next time I was at my bench, probably doing a refret that afternoon, I was sitting there hammering frets, and it dawned on me that I have no idea how much money it costs me to provide this service. And we're in a service business. We're providing a service to people. And by the way, just as an anecdote or just a little statement about that, as we're talking about myths, what I consider myths in pricing of this business, we're all in the service business. We're providing a service to customers. We're providing a service to guitar players or musicians. So we're providing a service to the public. We are by no stretch of the imagination providing a public service. And there's a huge difference there. You're not meant to starve while doing this. If you're starving your way, if you're luthing your way into the poorhouse, then you're doing it wrong, as far as I'm concerned. But getting back to my realization that I had no idea how much it cost me to put frets in a guitar. And I'm not talking about the fret wire. I'm not talking about the cost of the hammer. I'm talking about the cost of my business. When I provide this service, the act of providing this service, whatever the task I'm doing to the customer's guitar, carries with it a cost of providing that service. And for me, if I wasn't aware of the cost of providing this service, I had no clue whether or not what I was charging was enough to cover those costs and be profitable, by how much. We're all kind of engaged in an active craft that has a very, very high creative component to it, that a lot of times we don't like to think about the nuts and the bolts and the numbers part of what we're doing. But the point I'm trying to make about the general principle of this is that you're in business, whether it's loothing or whether you're turning a wrench on automobiles or whether you're manufacturing something, you're in business. And I found that I needed to start acting like it. So I needed to figure out how much it was costing me to provide the service to my customers. So therefore I could figure out how much to charge for it and how much I was making, whether or not I was profitable, whether I needed to charge more, whether I was charging too much. As far as I'm concerned, there is no way to charge too much. So that was the impetus and the beginning of my thinking about how to run my business as a Luth so that I could continue to run my business as a Luth. And that was also the day that I stopped worrying about what somebody else charges for a refret. Then every conversation that ever took place regarding that or in a similar fashion it was just a curiosity. It was just a way to shoot the shit with a Luth and pass the time. The concept of whether or not the guy 2 towns over from me, across the county, in the next state over, or across the country, what they charge for a refret was the furthest thing from my mind from there on out. I took the time to do a little bit of homework, and I started thinking about how my business worked. I'm a little bit of a geek by default, so whenever I have a problem to solve, a spreadsheet pops out of thin air and I start going to work anyway. But you don't necessarily have to be a geek to do this. You don't have to give up the artistic side of you in order to, put on a green eye shade and start crunching numbers. There are a couple of principles that I hold true. The whole idea of what my competition charges for something, to me, is irrelevant. As far as I'm concerned, the way I approach this concept, and like I said before, there will be diverging opinions on this. As far as I'm concerned, there is no such thing as a market price for a refret or a nut. I've been criticized by some for saying that, but there is my price for a nut, and there's what I need to charge for it in order to keep my business open. Excuse me. The other colloquialism that I'm going to challenge is as it relates to customers. We've all heard the phrase, the customer's always right. Bullshit. The customer's not. The customer's always the customer, that's true. Without them, your revenue stream disappears. But the customer is far from right every time they walk into the shop. They don't know what's going on with their guitar. They only know that their guitar buzzes. Why? What needs to be corrected? How much it's going to cost is going to be up to you. I gave up in the early to mid 90s, letting a customer be the deciding factor in what I need to charge to provide a certain service to the customer. And of course, factors come into play. But when a customer said to me, "Oh, I can get a refret over here for X compared to what you're charging," my answer was, "Okay, thanks for coming by." And there have been times where I've kind of been accused of being a little bit of a hard ass in that fashion, because once that once that Rubicon is passed for me at the front counter, somebody says, well, you're charging, if this was the mid-90s, you're charging $600 for the refret. I can get a refret for $350 down at wherever in White Plains. And I said, okay, that's fine. You can go there and get that. Well, no. I still want to leave. Sorry, no, I'm sorry. You've already crossed that Rubicon. You can go get your $300 refret, and I'll move on to the next customer. I've been at times a little bit of a grumpy luthier in that fashion, but I have worked. We've all worked too hard, as far as I'm concerned, to let the customer dictate to me how much he's willing to pay for my refret. And I have never had a lack of refrets to do as a result. I was on the phone just this week, twice. Once for an hour and a half, the other time for 2 hours, talking pricing with Lutz, who called me up, said, can we talk about this? And the same conversation happens time and time again, So, well, what are you charging for a refret? And they'll tell me, and I say, well, you need to double your refret tomorrow. Double your price for a refret as of tomorrow. Doug, if I double the price of my refret, I'd lose half my customers. I always say the same thing. Good, because you'll do half as many refrets for the same money. The notion that we're going to let that refret price dictate to us our work, to me, has to be let go. As I said before, you're running a business, and I don't care if it's out of a separate business space or out of your home, you're running a business and you need to start acting like it. I don't mean to sound preachy, but one of the points I made during the original business conversation was that if you're running a business out of your house, you don't or shouldn't be meeting with a customer and then pulling out a plate of pasta and sitting down and eating. Your business life and your Loothing life need to be separate from one another, just like your business finances and your Loothing finances, your personal finances need to be separate from one another. So if you're worried about, I've heard people say, I really don't have the time to spend all of that time crunching numbers and, keeping receipts and adding things up and making spreadsheets. I really need to be at the bench. I'm going to challenge that notion too, because you need to spend as much time working on your business as you do working in your business. People have heard me say that before as well. The easiest way to do that for most people is not go out and spend a bunch of money on a software for doing all sorts of accounting and not keeping all sorts of ledgers. That's simply if you use a separate bank account for your business than you do for your personal finances. So you have your Loothing account, you have your personal account, you have a Loothing credit card, and you have your personal accounts. Every dime you make from Loothing goes into that account. Every expense you have from Loothing comes out of that account. You don't cheat. You don't buy pizza with your Loothing, your business credit card, and you don't buy sandpaper with your personal money. The reason for that is at the end of the month, your bank sends you a statement along with your credit card company. And on it is every dime of income that went into the account, and on it is every dime of expenses that came out of it. Even if it's not itemized to your liking, you have, by definition, a profit and loss statement from your bank every month that does the work for you. It takes a few minutes to spend with it, and you'll have a very good idea in a very short amount of time how much in the way of expenses you're spending from your Loothing activity and how much income as a result you have as well. Of course, the goal is to have the income outpace the expenses, and what's left over by definition is profit. That's the simple way of looking at it. But then moving from there, you need to know, the way I price everything in our shop is from an expense basis. So I have to know how much it costs me to run my business from 1 hour to the next while I'm here, before I can determine how much my business makes. Because if I'm going to have profit, I have to know what my expenses are. So I've, spent a lot of years, and I use QuickBooks. I've been using QuickBooks since 1986. I know exactly every dime of expenses that I make, that I pay to run my business. And once you've done a little bit of an analysis of knowing what your expenses are, once you have an idea of how much your expenses are, you'll have an easy way to calculate how much it costs you to run your business from 1 hour to the next. If you take all of the expenses your business has and all of the things it consumes throughout the course of the year, throughout the course of a month, throughout the course of a week, you'll have a general idea of how much per hour your business burns on an hourly basis. If you then, once you have that number, that's what I call a burn rate. The burn rate of my business is how much my business burns per hour when I'm here. If it's a 40-hour week, if it's a 60-hour week, if it's an 80-hour week, that's up to you, how much you want to work. That's a lifestyle decision. But I know while I'm here that every hour I'm burning money when I'm, engaged in my business hours, whether I'm earning or not. With all due respect to my pal, Robbie O'Brien, I've heard him say, if I'm not at the bench, I'm not making money. So I do everything I can to make sure I'm at the bench all the time. Well, that's partially true, but you've heard a lot of people here have heard me say it before. I earn all of my money at my front counter when I'm examining instruments. I make all my money at the front counter when I'm examining instruments. I earn it when I'm at the bench. So my earnings rate is different from the rate at which I need to get paid, in the sense that while I'm in the shop, there's a good percentage of the time that I'm engaged in activities that do not generate revenue. We are sharpening chisels, doing books, ordering things, cleaning the shop, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Everything that needs to go into a business, communicating with customers, paying the bills, dealing with a leaky roof or an air conditioning system that's gone down, or whatever the circumstances are. For me, I've calculated that to about a 50% burn rate. So that about 50% of the time that I'm in the shop doing something, it's not generating revenue. The other 50% of the time I'm at my bench fixing a guitar, generating an invoice that creates revenue for my business. That revenue generating hour for me needs to pay for the hours that I'm not generating revenue. So if I use the 50% calculation, that's a simple number for me to do in my head. That if my company is burning X number of dollars an hour, no matter what the activity, whether it's goofing around on a Luthalong, working on a guitar at the bench, sharpening chisels so that I can work more effectively, or doing some R&D or practicing some new technique that I learned on the Luth group, those hours are not generating revenue for me, and I have to have the hours that are generating revenue pay for my non-generating revenue hours. I used to use the word productive versus non-productive, but those non-productive hours are usually quite productive. But what I charge my customer for the service I'm providing has to pay for those hours, or I'll be out of business. So right off the bat, if I just use the example of that 50-50 divide, if I have X number of dollars of expenses per hour that I'm burning, my burn rate, then I my break-even rate would be X dollars per hour times 2 at a 50% ratio. If it's different for you, it would be 60-40 or it would be 70-30 or what have you. But for me, I like the number of 50-50 just because it gives me the opportunity to, spend time working on my business. So that expense ratio times 2 equals how much money I have to generate from my repairs in order to break even and get to the end of the month and not owe anybody any money. But that's not where it stops, because there I'm just surviving. I paid all of the shop's expenses, but I haven't eaten yet. I got to pay me. So we have our expense ratio, we have our break-even rate, and then we have how much money do I want to make? There's a cost to your business, and that is you. Everybody is an expense to their business, because if it weren't you filing away at a nut, if you weren't you doing the refret, if it weren't you sanding out a finish, you would have to pay somebody else to do that in order for your business to stay alive. We shouldn't work for our businesses for free, just like we shouldn't work for anybody else's businesses for free. So what is the cost of you doing the work you're doing? That is a personal decision. I've determined for us how much money we want to make, and I've added that number per hour based on just a simple formula. How much do I want to make per year? How much does that come out to per month? How much does that come out to per week? How much does that come out per hour? That gets added to our revenue generating hours, so that we now have a more whole number of what our services should cost to the customer. And then above that, I need to provide for the growth of my business. I need to add a number above that for what would commonly be considered retained earnings for the company, so the company can grow. Sooner or later, I'm going to need to buy a new something, fretting hammer, whatever, more sandpaper. Well, that's expensive, but if I'm going to want to upgrade my bandsaw, if I'm going to want to get a 3D printer, if I'm going to want to get whatever it is that I need to get, another computer when mine dies and needs to be replaced. All of those things are expenses to the business for growth and replacement that need to be added into your hourly rate in order for you to stay in business and grow. Because every time you need to replace something that fails on you, whether it's a tool or a piece of equipment, or the need to expand, I need to get another bench so I can get more work on the tables. Those are expenses that shouldn't come out of daily expenses or your profit. They should be paid by your customers. And then, of course, you can add on top of that some measure of profit for retained earnings into the company, and just for growth, or just that you want to make more money. You want a better cost of living. You want a better lot in life next year than you did the year before. So that's the general idea of how I approach doing our pricing. So it has nothing to do with how much somebody gets for a refret. It has everything to do with what I need to do to provide the service I'm providing, how much I need to get for it in order to stay business, and how much I need to increase that price as I go along in order to have my business survive and thrive. With that, I want to bring in, is Danny West here? I want to bring in Danny, because what I did was I made a spreadsheet. You around, Danny?
I'm here.
Okay, so I'm going to, Danny has figured this out wonderfully. We made a spreadsheet for doing exactly what I just went through. I ran through it as quick as I could. I'm sorry if it seemed a little just disjointed, but it was a kind of a synopsis of what we did the first time when we talked about business stuff, and as it relates to charging stuff, as it relates to pricing. We have a spreadsheet that we posted on the Luth Group website, and we can post. We posted on Patreon, I think. We can post it to the Luth Group website after this is done, I guess, because it's something that I came up with to help with the idea of doing this. There's two versions of the spreadsheet. One is for a home-based shop up on top, and down at the bottom is for a shop with an independent space, meaning you're renting a space outside of your home. They're both very similar, but they approach it from a couple of different standpoints. One of them, the one at the top, is allows you to put in all of your household expenses in a number. And then you get to put in the square footage of your house and then the square footage of your shop, and it would give you a percentage of how much your total household expenses are being consumed by your shop. Because one of the things I've heard Luth say is that, oh, I Luth out of my house, so I don't have any overhead. That's the biggest misconception you can have. Because if you're Luthing out of your house, your business is a tenant in your home. It's taking up space, it's taking up resources, it's taking up electricity, gas, you name it. And we're not talking about for deductible purposes, we're talking about how much your business is costing you to run. So let's say you have, just for a round number's sake, mortgage, insurance, utilities, and oh, by the way, when we're talking about expenses, whether it's in your house or out of your house, I just made a quick list just for my own head's sake. If it's either in your house or in a rented space or in an outside space, an independent space for your business, you have rent or mortgage, insurance, cost of goods, cost of sales, of course, tools. And we all know everybody wants to buy a prop jack. Shop supplies, raw materials, parts and inventory, bank charges, interest on credit cards or notes, books, subscriptions, dues, memberships, Luth Group membership, et cetera, equipment, shipping, utilities, heat, gas, oil, electricity, communications, cell phones, internet, security, legal and professional fees, office and computer supplies, office supplies, software, maintenance, janitorial expenses, furniture, fixtures, advertising. You pay money monthly for a website or spend money on social media or online advertising, or you're buying t-shirts to give away, and then if you have anybody working for you, you got payroll and all sorts of other expenses above and beyond that. And of course, let's not forget about taxes. That's a lot of expenses that your business consumes and is costing you to provide that service before you can even get to how much should I charge for a nut. So let's just say, for hypothetical purposes, let's say, the number of your, let's say you're spending $5,000 a month. Let's say you're spending $2,500 a month, whatever that number is, that's where that goes. If the square footage of your house, let's say it's 2,500 square feet. Let's say the shop is 500 square feet. The spreadsheet will tell you that your shop takes up 20% of your household, and therefore 20% of your household's expenses. And I'm not talking about food in the fridge. I'm talking about raw expenses that you cost to run your house. If you pay somebody to do the lawn at your house, your shop is consuming 20% of that bill, and should be. I've even argued as far as people should have a separate entity for their business, even if it's in their house, and then figure out how much that business is consuming of the household expenses, and then having your business write you and your spouse a check for rent every month to cover those expenses. because that brings it in stark reality. Then of course you have, how much your monthly expenses are for your shop, and then how much your those expenses are divided by weekly. How many hours you run in your shop, and how many hours here by percentage that we're going to call our revenue hours, which to me are 50%. You can adjust that how you would need. That would tell you then what your burn rate in the shop is, and then how much you have to earn in order to cover those base expenses. Then if you want to make, 100 grand a year loothing, is that 100 grand? Yeah. That means you're going to need to make $8,333 a month, or $2,083.33 a week, divided by the monthly hours that you're working at the bench. That gives you your monthly income hourly rate that you need to live off of. And then you add all of that up together, you should be charging $116 an hour to meet those goals. And if you're not, then you're falling short, then you're falling behind. So that's, for me, how I worked it out in my head all of those years ago, and that's how I've always done it. Then there is more areas down here, another number that you can add, that you're going to want to buy a new piece of equipment sooner or later, so you want to reinvest in your business. If you want to put money a month into the business, if you want to add $500 a month for equipment, new tools, or to reinvest into the business, you would add that to your spreadsheet here, and that gives you, based on the hours that you put in that you're loothing, how much you need to charge in addition to your hourly rate, to give you the rate that you would be charging to the customer to provide the service that you're doing. Of course, then how you want to adjust that based on how much profit you want can be adjusted up or down from there. So if your philosophy for running your business is you want to run, the hammer and sickle guitar repair business that, allows for, payment from all as they can and to all as they want, that's up to you. You can do that. I don't know if you can be doing it for very long, but, that's where the philosophy of running your business comes into play. Are you do you want to be the low-cost provider that has a line around the block of people with tons and tons of guitars, so that you can get lots of instruments across your bench because you're young and you want to be able to really sharpen your skills and have the opportunity to see a ton more work? That's entirely up to you. If you want to be the more exclusive shop that raises your rates and has, maybe fewer guitars as a result, that's up to you as well. That's a philosophical thing. But let's come down here to the bottom part of the spreadsheet, which is the independent shop space outside your house. So Danny runs a shop space outside of his house, and he runs the numbers. You want to give it to us, Danny? Did he leave?
Danny's muted.
I
Oh, I'm muted. Sorry.
thought you left.
No, I wouldn't do that to you.
All right, so let's start right at the top. If you're running an independent shop space, we're not worried about how much square footage it has as compared to your house, because you're not in your house. You have fixed shop expenses, rent, security, utilities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So what's that number for you?
For me, it's 900.
Okay, so you're renting a space that's costing you 900 all in for expenses.
Yeah.
You have expenses, everything you spend on loothing throughout the course of the year. Do you know what that number is?
I put 500 for my monthly.
Okay, does that include everything? Does that include going to Northwoods? Does that include travel to get there? Does that include all of those things?
Not this year, no.
Okay, so this is where reality has to come in. We
Yeah.
have to be honest with ourselves what we're actually spending on the business providing the service that we're providing. And the more granular that you get in this field here, the more reality will be at the end of the spreadsheet. If you leave too many things off, you wind up not charging enough. So this is everything having to do with running your business. But let's say for now, you're right that it's $500 a month running the shop. So we have down here, total monthly expenses are 1,400. Total expenses divided by weekly is 350. How many hours a week are we looting?
I'm doing 40.
Okay, and how many hours a week by percentage are you spending looting versus actually earning at the bench versus doing stuff to run your business?
I play with this one a little bit, but it's generally between 50 and 55%.
55% of revenue hours. So what do you
Yeah.
want to call it? 50 or 55? You want to just
Let's
leave it?
let's just do 55.
Okay, 55%. So now my shop revenue hours are 22 hours. Shop revenue multiplier to break even is 1.82, which means we have to charge at least $15.91 an hour just to pay our bills. Let's put a number here. How much money you want to make next year?
I have 70.
All right, so you want to make 70,000. Is that realistic in San Diego?
Yeah.
Okay. So our desired monthly income now is $5,833. Desired weekly income would be $1,458. Total monthly income at an hour added to the break-even rate is $66.29. We add it up. Now we have to charge $82.20 in order to achieve those goals. Now let's talk about profit and let's talk about reinvesting in the business. So how much you want to reinvest in the business monthly?
I have 250 on my spreadsheet.
Is that realistic? Have you been breaching that or have you been kind of meeting that?
I would say going under, but
Okay.
it's nice to have that cushion.
So that's where the money for Northwoods came from.
Yeah.
So we have to add 284 to our shop rate in order to be able to achieve those goals if we're spending those hours in the shop every month. What's your current hourly rate that you're charging to customers?
95 an hour.
Okay, so you're above that, which is fine because
Yeah.
extra.
So what happened was I had that extension studio, and I've since condensed back into one.
Oh, you had to increase your expenses and now you pulled them back.
Yeah, but I'm not gonna go back.
I wouldn't either. In fact, I would challenge you now to even raise your rates even more. Because when it comes down to it, and that's how we put this spreadsheet together just so you can put it in a snapshot perspective for yourself to see how you're doing. This isn't by any stretch of the imagination something that's supposed to be, in the form of scripture. It's not something that we need to adhere to the letter, but it gives you an ability to massage and play with the numbers and look at it and see if those, at the end of the year, if you added up all your expenses and your expenses wound up being a lot more than the numbers you put in there, then you have to figure out what's going on. So this gives you just a tool with which to be able to, keep abreast of your business, keep an idea of what's going on in the business so that you can remain profitable and make those decisions about where you want to be in the price spectrum. Then when it comes down to it, the two ways that you have that you can increase your earnings are, there's only 2 or 3 things you can do. You can increase revenue, which might mean working more hours, producing more. you can become more efficient and get more done in less time, or you can reduce your expenses. And that's a little bit more finite and a little bit more less controllable, because when we live in a world where, it costs, I look at us, I think in 2019 and 2020, it cost us about $6,500, maybe $7,000 for the year to heat our space for the winter. In 2022, that number was 16,500. And that has a huge impact on your business. So sometimes those expenses we don't necessarily have control over, because inflation, as of recent, has been the thing that's been kicking everybody's ass, and including ours. So that has to be thought about. That has to be factored into what you're deciding what to do. I personally, I saw the horizon line, and I saw that it looked like fuel prices were going up. It's something I'm conscious of every year because I got to buy oil, like a lot of us do. Back in 2021, I increased our shop rate by, I think it was 12.5%. In 2021, I raised by 12.5% our shop rate in order to cover the inflationary aspects of things that were going on. And in 2022, I raised it another 15%, because I saw how much things were costing us, to heat, to cool, electricity, all of that stuff. And I needed to know that our business was able to absorb those costs and pay for them. And I've only got one place to look for to do that, which is my customers. So with that, that's kind of the end of my.
Can I squeeze in there?
You can.
Just for a second.
Yeah.
So there are some things that I think could maybe go on that list. Just a hunch, but like charity work, like how much charity work you're going to do per month, and then also work that we all wind up taking in repair work that is like somewhat speculative. Maybe there's a technique that you want to learn, or how to budget for, like, you've never done any neck resets before, but then you take in 5 neck resets to learn on at the same time,
Well, yeah, is that what you want me to address?
Well, I just wonder if it would be useful to add those
Yeah,
things.
well, it does. I think there in the calculations that I had put on that spreadsheet and the principles behind it, for me, a 50-50 rule in terms of how much time I'm spending revenue generating and non-revenue generating, to me, is the thing that catches all of that,
all that extra stuff. Yeah.
Because I've been doing this for 40 years, and I learn something new on the Luth group every week that I want to go and practice, and I need time to sit down and practice it on a crash dummy, because I don't believe in practicing on customer instruments. If I haven't done a neck reset before, I want to do neck resets on guitars that aren't owned by customers in order to get to the point where I feel I can. And I've done that my whole life. That's where that's covered for in my little thing, where that 50% of the time that I'm not generating revenue, I'm generating skills, or I'm honing my own skills, and I'm expecting the hours that I do generate revenue to pay for those hours. Now, as far as the charity thing is concerned, I really believe that charity begins at home. My business has to be profitable before it can be charitable. We run a very expensive guitar shop. We are probably, and I'm not saying so for the purposes of bragging rights, but we're probably at the top of the food chain when it comes to how much we charge for the service we provide. I suspect, and I know regionally we are, and I suspect certainly nationally we're probably close to the top, if not right up there. And I don't say that as a matter of pride. I say that as a matter of, that's what I charge because I want to make a good living. I've never considered, not since that conversation with Roger and the aftermath of me thinking about that, I've never concerned myself with what somebody else charges for X, whether it's a refret, a nut, a saddle, a setup. I think there are enough customers out there. We've never suffered from a backlog. We've never suffered from a lack of instruments to work on. We've always had, for 25, 30 years, we had a backlog of 300 to 400 instruments in the house at any given time. The ability for me to be charitable with my work and choose when that aligns with my values, my profit is what allows me to do that. So if I have a guy come in with a guitar during the course of conversation, or if as recently it happened, we had a customer of mine called me up and he said he had his pastor who had a guitar that he was using for his church group was falling apart, and could I look at it? It gives me the opportunity to look at the guitar. It needed thousands of dollars worth of work, and I was, in a position to be able to turn to the priest after when he came to pick it up and say, here you go. It's yours free of charge. Or that person who is having difficulty because they lost their job, and as you're chatting with them at the front counter trying to get their guitar into shape and getting to know them a little bit, you find out that their company went through a downsizing and they're out of work, and because of some kind of disability that they're having difficulty finding new work. You say, you know what, the repair's on me. So that's where it factors in for me. I get to choose, and we do very often, when we're going to be charitable with our business.
On your 50%, like, are you actually like physically scheduling that time?
It varies.
Do you just have a gut instinct of when you've been maybe experimenting too much and you're like, oh shit, I gotta get back to the bench? Or
well, yeah, there's times where you got to stop putzing around and make some money.
yeah,
So
I was just wondering, like, for me it might be helpful to put a chess clock on that. I'm just
and there was a period of time where I did use a stopwatch to do that, to make sure that I was looking at the clock saying, okay, I'm going to go in the finishing room and mess around with some touch-up techniques that I've been dying to try. So I'm going to go in, it's 4:00 now, I'm going to go in and I'm going to stay in there until 5:30 or 6, and then I'm going to come back out the bench and work on a guitar. Or if there's things that I need to do. There are days where you sit down and the day goes into a tailspin and you're trying to solve all sorts of issues or problems or, whatever. And the next thing you know, it's like 8 hours have passed and you have no idea that you didn't even realize that you didn't even turn on the bench lights because the whole day went to hell. That's part of running a business. Running a business is running from putting out one fire to the next sometimes. But to answer your question, when I first started formulating the notion of this is how I was going to come up with how much I charge for the service, and then all of the aspects of what goes into that and how much, my business has to pay for those quote unquote non-productive hours, which can be some of the most productive you have. But they're just non-revenue generating. And so when I first started thinking about that, there was a very conscious effort to make sure that it didn't go above 50%. And there were times where I was trying to massage it closer to 40 or 30 because I wanted to make more money, or I wanted to figure out how to make more money, so.
Cool. We should probably get on to the next.
Can I ask Doug a question?
Who wants to ask it?
Chris Jenkins.
Chris, let her rip.
Doug, couple of things. One, you mentioned actually writing yourself a check if you have a home business.
Mm-hmm.
And I would like to stress that people do that, because if it ever comes to the fact that you're going to sell your business, those expenses need to be proven, shown, and that'll make a huge difference in the value of the business. I can attest to that as somebody who's sold, businesses, and that's something that you need to do, But I wanted to ask you on your spreadsheet there, do you have a section for retirement or pension fund? Because I think when I was young, I didn't think about that, but
Right.
it's an important thing that people start doing very young, and it should be in there, I think.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, I didn't include a separate line in that. When I created the spreadsheet, I wanted it to be simpler rather than more complicated. So I also didn't want to go to the point where I added so many lines that somebody would look at the spreadsheet and go, you know what, I'm not going to bother with that. But yes, you're absolutely right. In the part where you're paying yourself, there should be a conscious effort to put money aside by all means. So if I chose that number, say that Danny did, and said, oh, I want to make 70 grand a year, that's all fine and well. And then the question, of course, from a personal financial standpoint would have been to Danny to say, how much of that 70 grand are you putting aside into a retirement account or an IRA or something like that? Then if the answer is nothing, that means that 70 grand now needs to become maybe 77, so we can put aside 10%, or 84, so we can put aside 20% per year, so that he can retire. And that's where that number would go in the how much am I paying myself to do this job. That's where I figured it would be in the spreadsheet. But you're absolutely right about the part
I
of,
think they just need to figure in the maximum retirement contribution allowed by law if you're self-employed.
yeah,
That's
absolutely.
right.
Mhm.
So I think it's probably 14% from a SEP standpoint or something like that, but
Doug, can I chime in for a sec?
Be my guest.
The thing you said about having the separate bank accounts for your personal account and Luthery is great. One thing that I do is I have my Luthery account, my bank
Mhm.
account, and every month automatically money is deducted from that goes into my retirement, my investment, and stuff like that. I don't even know it's happening. So it just comes out so that I don't have to sit there and say at the end of the month, oh, I need to put into my retirement. What it does tell you, though, is how much money you actually need to make, because X amount of dollars is non-existent. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Getting out. So yeah, it's just something to think about, that it makes the process easier and gives you a better picture of what you should be making at the end of the month.
That's a great point.
Nick, I want to get to you, but I want to go towards the end because we're not sure how long we have the rest of our guys here. So
Yeah, sure.
we should probably move on. Who do you
Yeah,
think
if you've got questions for any of us, we'll have a
also like throw the
robust question and answer part at the end as possible.
Yep.
David Collins,
Yeah.
You're somebody who we've met recently through the Luth Along and then again in person in Michigan. You're a rock star, man. You have figured out how to make this work, not only just from a Luthing standpoint, obviously, because you're unbelievably talented. But actually, I don't like the word talented. You're unbelievably skillful is the way I like to look at it. But you've also figured out how to make it work from a business standpoint, which is why I asked you to join us today. And you've got, from the brief conversations we have had, you have a very different approach from where I come from. And that's why I wanted to have you here with us today. So take it away.
Well, actually, it's funny you mentioned that, because just during your talk there, you shared an idea that I thought was absolutely brilliant. And while you were talking, I went ahead and decided to redesign my logo. And I think I'm going to be changing my business name here, because I think that's actually a big seller for branding in the fairly Marxist community that I live in. But we do. I mean, Hesh was my business partner for 10 years. Hesh Breakstone came and apprenticed with me, and he pestered me for about 2 years to take him on as a student, which I did as a paid student. He paid me for it. and then worked for a few years as an apprentice. Started his own business that I would contract out to, Overflow after that. And then about 12 years ago, we combined and formed a single LLC. And a lot of what I learned from business, I have to credit him with. Before that, I did struggle a lot. There is what is often referred to as sometimes a Midwest mentality. I'm sure it's not isolated to the Midwest, or a poverty mentality. A lot of people get into this trade because they have to, because they're tinkering with their own stuff, because they can't afford to have other people do it, or because they grow up in a farm or in a family of tinkerers, and that's just how things are done. You know, nobody ever contracts out to anything. I've never had a paid for haircut since birth. I've never had a paid for haircut in my life, because that's just not what our family did. You know, mom cut our hair, friends cut each other's hair. You know, it's how it worked. You know, we always fixed our own cars. We always, you know, redid our roof. And that mentality sticks with people and is really hard to break, and is really hard to recognize that you do have worth as a service technician, as a, you know, an industry specialist that you should be able to charge for. And it may not reach the levels of value as an attorney, but it should at least be on par with auto mechanics, plumbers, electricians, because that's what we are. You know, so many people romanticize this trade as being artisans. We are service providers, and what we do has no more magic to it than a plumber, which, you know, blows me away. I'm as impressed with a plumber who knows how to sweat a pipe perfectly, or you know, come up with some solution that I wouldn't think of, as other people tend to be when we can fix something miraculously on their instrument. So it's no different. We do have to realize we deserve to make the same, and to make a decent living that way. We do our pricing. We talked about this briefly, and we have a little bit different philosophy on setting the price. I do a lot of the same things that you do. And then my apologies, I didn't prepare for this meeting at all. Everything is totally off the cuff. I didn't bring any spreadsheets or anything, but your spreadsheet, I just kind of mentally went through the numbers. We incorporate pretty much everything you had in there in a little bit different form. You know, we do things, you know, monthly in some cases instead of annually. But the numbers we came out with are almost identical. You know, your 50% billable hours, you know, that's what I refer to it as billable hours, is right on par. That's actually my target. I have a target for daily billable hours of revenue that I generate that is right around 50%. And we do a lot of the same calculations, but I do like the spreadsheet. Is that downloadable?
Yeah, at some point we'll be posting that.
Yeah, we'll get it.
Website.
There's a business section on the new website on the forum, and that'll definitely go in there.
Okay, cool. Well, yeah, because just doing a loose look through of that, it comes out pretty much exactly as we do it in terms of the end numbers. In terms of how we bill our services, we do have we don't do it as strictly by the hour estimates as it sounds like you do. We do tend to do more of incorporating the idea of value delivered to our clients. There are some jobs, you know, where you can have a headstock repair that is incredibly simple, a clean break, you know, no color touch up, something that might take, you know, a total of 2.5 hours hands-on time. But we also recognize that we are saving that instrument from being a total loss. It could be a $3,000 Les Paul that, if done wrong, could be, you know, permanently traumatized and never recover its value, and left as is completely unusable. So what we charge on that is actually more than the hands-on hours we expect to put in, because we are delivering a value to the customer. We're delivering a service that has a value that exceeds the hours we put in. Some of that,
I do want to address that just to ask you a couple of questions about it. But in that context, I don't charge an hour's worth of time for an hour's worth of labor. I have average rates for each repair just based on my internal, analysis of how long it takes us to do a job. So, an average refret, I charge at 6 hours, even though not all refrets take 6 hours to do. Those nightmare jobs that take 10 hours as compared to the ones that take 4 hours or 2 hours, they all come out in the wash at about, 4.5 to 5 hours. And then I add a third in for profit. But I charge the same rate for each refret that comes through the door, figuring it all comes out at the end. I don't run a stopwatch on repairs. But I do want to come back to that to ask you a couple of questions about the idea of adding value. So you're using the word value differently than I would normally hear it, because when you say the value to the customer, customers think about value as cheaper.
Right.
They're getting more for their dollar. In this case, you're talking about you've added value to the guitar, therefore you're going to charge more than just the number of hours it took you. Am I reading that right?
well, not entirely. It's more an issue of, I'm sure everyone has had this and probably wish we had a lot more of you delivering an end product to a customer. It might be a fret dress, it might be a setup, it might be, something that took you 20 minutes to do, that you charge an hour for, because that's your minimum, billable bench fee. That's what we do, is 1 hour is our bench fee essentially. And we get customers who will come in and say, I would have paid double for this. You're not charging enough. It's because it's worth so much more to them. They appreciate the value they receive. What they got is worth more to them than what you paid. And when you hear that, it usually means you should be charging more. But for some jobs, take installing a K&K pickup. Installing a K&K pickup takes me 15, 20 minutes, for the whole thing. We charge an hour's worth of work. And it's because a pickup installation, taking that guitar, installing it right, eliminating the liability for the customer of doing something wrong. We had, getting super glue on the finish, stuff like that. All of that has value that goes significantly beyond our time that we have to spend with it. That's probably one of the better examples.
Okay.
But it's loosely based on the idea of the way the rest of the market works, the way the retail market works. If you're looking at a piece of clothing, at a purse or a pair of shoes or a watch, that purse might cost $5 to manufacture. It might cost $50 to manufacture. The company selling that purse doesn't care. They don't base that off of what it costs to manufacture. Obviously, they try to keep it low, but they base their price on what the market will value it at, with its branding and function. So if that purse is marketed, or if they think they can get $250 for that purse, they'll charge $250, whether it costs them $5 or $50 to make. That never sits entirely right with me. I don't want to be an opportunist and just try to gouge and get as much as we can. But there's some of that reasoning that works its way into how we price some jobs.
Do you have a firm understanding, at least internally, of what those kind of jobs that you would throw in that basket, or is it the kind of thing where say, oh, I have a shop labor rate of a minimum of an hour's charge, no matter what I'm doing, and that has a tendency to scoop up a lot of those types of repairs?
That does scoop up a lot of it, but some of it I think is probably regional. Some of it is going to vary from market to market, Midwest versus the coasts. But now we don't I don't want to make it sound like there's a total disconnect between our hours and between the end value, but we do include that end value. So some jobs that we are very efficient at and very quick at, we will set our flat rate for that type of job at 50% more or twice as much as the hours we put into it. Because I mean, I can do, a fret dress, typically fret dress and setup combined in, an hour and a half. Sometimes it'll take me an hour and 10 minutes. We charge 3 hours labor for a fret dress. And that's one of those things, because that's really the value the customer is receiving. They are getting an incredible increase in the performance of their guitar that I think I feel comfortable is saying is worth $345,
Well, yeah, and I think that goes a long way to drive home the point that, in my estimation, the better we get at our jobs, like in most professions, the more money you should make.
You should always be rewarded for your experience.
So,
for the
like,
time
if
you spend
you're
with
somebody who has like created some wild, crazy new fretting tool, perhaps, that gets you to the end of that fret job faster, and if you're charging 3 hours for what you would consider the market rate for that, and I charge 3 hours for a level and crown as well. If you can do it in an hour and a half, or an hour and 10 minutes, or even 30 minutes, why shouldn't you still charge the 3 hours? That's the way I look at it as well.
Yeah.
So I think that's
Yeah, until everybody has the same tool and they're all doing it. When I was just out of the guitar factory, I could cut a bone nut in 12 minutes because I was just like, I did 2 a day for several years. I just say, don't hate me because I'm beautiful. I'm still charging the $100 for it. Like,
Yep, absolutely. But one of the things I want to emphasize that I think is getting back to where I started with the poverty mentality and the Midwest or farmer mentality, a lot of people come in with. A lot of luthiers will punish themselves. They will feel guilty that they're gouging, that they're charging 3 hours. They're getting $340, $300, whatever it is, for something that ended up taking them 50 minutes. And automatically jump to discount that, which sometimes you can, but usually the client that we take those jobs in for is fully prepared and happy to pay the $300 for. And that's where the hammer and sickle luthery comes in, is because Hesh and I joke about, running kind of a socialist, pricing structure where it is exactly those jobs where we were able to bill 3 hours and work to 1 hour, which allow us to spend an hour on something that we don't charge for at all, because it's for some student who, there is charity work. Everyone does little bits and pieces like that. And so some of that is actually true. There is a little bit of a socialist pricing structure in charging to the people who can pay, still making sure that we put ourselves, we maintain our interests. We are paying ourselves a fair wage. We're not dipping into our own pockets to subsidize charity work. We're dipping into other people's pockets who are happy to pay for the work to subsidize the charity work, and still make sure that we're making a perfectly comfortable income in the end.
Just like the federal government.
Exactly. Yep.
Hey,
we are really good at spending other people's money here.
Before this degenerates into total anarchy, I want to say, like, addressing that low self-esteem and pricing, like that was one of the things, like early on when Doug says about the early days of the Luth Group and IHG, like what I was trying to get at was that low self-esteem of, I don't know how many times I've heard guys say, we didn't get in this to get rich. And I'm just like, there's a whole, gradient in between abject poverty and rich. There's like this living wage area in there. It feels I really enjoy hearing that from you, David. So
Well, there's no reason to feel ashamed that you feel like you should be making 100,000 a year or more. I mean, I think that's a reasonable income for a specialist in this trade, depending on what area of the country you're in. Maybe it's 70,000 somewhere, maybe it's 130 somewhere else, but or it could be more. But I mean, you're a business owner, you're an entrepreneur. Usually, people are not accounting for all of the loss they spent in their first years apprenticing, barely scraping by. You deserve to make up some of that back pay as you start to get better with it. But there's another area I wanted to just briefly touch on, and I think that'll about cover, my main focus. Doug did a lot about liabilities. We're really big on liabilities in this shop. Every expense you have, liabilities aren't just risk, they're known expenses. Your rent is a liability. All your overhead is liabilities. And then there's all sorts of unknown liabilities. But one of the biggest things we have in avoiding liabilities is avoiding lost opportunity costs. Your time, every hour that you are on the clock, or on the clock as it would be, comes with an opportunity cost if you are not billing that time. And we're already accepting that 50% of an average worker's day billable is a pretty good goal. That's a reasonable, average. But we still want to avoid letting any more of those hours get sucked away and lose that's an opportunity cost. Every extra 20 minutes you spend with a customer who's wasting your time, who you're not going to get work from, and who you don't really feel like helping, is an opportunity cost. That's $20 or 20 minutes of your billable hours you just took out of your pocket there. So we really
I'm having a little bit of a hard time keeping up with that. So what you're talking about in terms of opportunity costs you're looking at it from the liability side, from the loss side.
Yes.
So that you're avoiding the loss of income due to an activity or due to whatever it might be that is, stealing those fries off your plate.
Yes.
So like you said, if it's that customer who, shows up with a guitar once a week that they bought at, Guitar Center, that they're just bringing by just to see if they should return it or not, is stealing 20 minutes of your time, that you're going to try to avoid that loss of what you're calling an opportunity cost. Is that?
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Opportunity cost is just simply how we refer to any time that you could have been billing when it's spent on something you're not billing. That's the opportunity to earn money that you've surrendered or has been taken away from you.
So they're those things that are taking your 50% formula that you had and driving it down to 48 or 45 or such and such, and you're trying to avoid those things that are stealing those. Okay.
How we do that is there's kind of a core principle in every customer interaction we have, and that is separating out the suspects from the prospects. Those are the buckets that we use: suspects and prospects. Prospects are people who could potentially become conversions, who you're going to generate revenue from. Suspects are people who are going to suck the money out of your pocket and take time that you could bill toward other things. And we try to separate those in the first 5 words of the conversation. You can usually get an idea pretty quick with most customers, whether it's by email or text or phone or however you interact with customers. We probably turn away somewhere in the range of 50% of the clients we're approached with.
Yeah.
Can you before they even visit the shop, just from the phone call? We want to stop them before they set foot in the door, because that's going to cost us so much more time and money than what we can get rid of. We deal with phone calls because I can work while I talk. I can keep it on an earpiece or speakerphone.
Can you talk about the how you go about declining and some of the emotional jujitsu you might might employ to tell somebody that you're not a good fit for them?
Sometimes we lie.
No, I think lying is completely appropriate.
Yeah.
You know, white lies to preserve somebody's feelings and just, you know, figure out how to go down different paths, I think is completely appropriate. But yeah,
Well,
do you have a Rolodex of lies or?
Yeah. One is we just don't have capacity. We're beyond capacity. We can't fit any more instruments in. I'm sorry. Another one is often honest, where people are looking for work done that we don't specialize in. We do try to specialize in certain types of job. Evan is the master of that, and I certainly have learned a lot from him on that. But we tend to cherry pick jobs that we have the widest margins on, that we're the most efficient at doing, that we can guarantee success with. We want every job, when we take it in, we don't want any chances that we can't guarantee success, that person is not going to be thrilled when they pick it up. So we don't take in risky jobs.
Can I interject on that just really quickly? Did you ever one of the things that was hard for me was like sorting that out, because it really felt like a hit to my ego to say, look, like not every broken guitar deserves to be fixed. But in the early days, it really felt like a challenge, that every challenge needed to be met. Did you feel that way at one point?
Yeah, I did, but I would phrase it a little different, than not every broken guitar deserves to be fixed. It's true, but even of the ones that absolutely do deserve to be fixed, you're under no obligation to be the person who has to do it. We don't work on Rickenbackers. We don't do Guild neck resets. I will do a Gibson neck reset from the 30s or 40s, but I won't do a wide flat heel from the 60s. I won't do a 70s Gibson neck reset. Ones that I just have learned are more unpredictable, can have more time you're going to invest in finish touch-up. There's a lot of things we don't do. We don't work on ovations. So one of the things we'll tell people when they call us is we don't want to do work for anyone where we feel we aren't the best or the fastest or the cheapest to do it. Somebody else can do it better, faster, and cheaper. I want to refer you to them. So give these people a call. That's why the folks at Elderly's have got to hate me by now, because I just send them all sorts of stuff. But you don't have to be everything to everyone. Even if
we were just there and we saw the size of the pile of stuff that you referred to them.
Yeah. Yep.
I've often said that I'm not the patron saint of Silvertone.
Yeah.
And that's the same principle. I will, there are some things that we do that, like I mentioned earlier, are a little bit on the come off as a little high-handed sometimes to the customer. I was mentioning to somebody earlier today, if a customer calls or emails me and the question is how much or how long, and that's the first question they have regarding their guitar repair, my answer to them is your needs will be better served at another shop.
Yeah. And that can be an honest answer, and people will value that. That's another thing that people don't realize is the amount of customers who have become steadfast loyal to us. They want us to do the work because we have declined to work on guitars for them. There's probably a little psychology in being the unobtainium, the exclusive, and the hard to get. But I think more of it is that the customer sees they can view you as a trusted advisor who actually includes their interests in your advice, rather than coming in with a job and saying, sure, I'll take your money. If you can tell them or try to convince them, you don't even have to try and convince them, just tell them it's your opinion, that they could throw all this money into this guitar. It's going to cost them $600 to do the work on this guitar, but that money would be throwing good money after bad, because there's other shortcomings of the design that are likely to lead to failure down the road. Or that $600, you would get so much better return on it by investing it in a replacement guitar. Take this one, throw it up on Craigslist. call it a project guitar for some, hobbyist luthier to tinker with. But we tell people like that, and just for that reason, we're not going to take it in. And people love us for it. They actually value people being honest instead of selling and selling and selling and selling.
Yeah.
So turning work away, I think, is one of the most important things that a lot of shops need to learn. And it's, again, separating the suspects from the prospects. That's not always labeling the customer as though they should be considered a suspect in a derogative sense. Sometimes that's talking about the guitar. A Rickenbacker is a suspect. It's not a prospect. We don't want to take it in. There's too many things that are going to end up taking you 3 times as long as you budget for. I think that's mostly the gist of what I have. I was also going to say, you mentioned, as far as, one more thing. I do take in, we do have in our shop 2 instruments at a time that I consider large projects. And that's just a cap that we set for my own psychology, my own emotional reasons. If I have more than that in the shop, it is too much of a burden. It weighs on my shoulders. I start to have dreams about the stuff I'm working on. There's too many things waiting to be done. We keep so busy with the, refrets, and I took 2 refrets in yesterday. Refrets, nuts and saddles, bridge re-glues, setups. We can do just those jobs, and of course Martin binding repairs, and keep busy. But I don't want to feel like I've just become a 15-minute oil change and just do the same thing over and over and over and over again. So I like to have 1 or 2 things in the shop that can challenge me a little, that can force me to, expand my horizons and experience. And they're interesting to work on. And I was going to mention, now you said you didn't like practicing, new things on customer instruments. I was going to say you're lucky you're not a social worker, because Alan doesn't have the choice. He has to try new techniques on subject there.
Maybe that's why I'm comfortable doing it with guitars too. I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah. So, but I think that's about it for me. Main criteria: separating out the suspects from the prospects. Always be aware of liability, and never feel bad that you're charging too much for something, because you're worth it. You certainly should be able to do it.
That's awesome.
This just in from David Collins. You're worth it.
That
feels good, man.
That's fantastic. So I want to turn to Alan for a couple of things. One is that when you and I first met, I think you were going through a period of time that you were kind of having this crisis of, what do I charge customers, for a multitude of reasons. But do you want to speak to that, or you want to go into your
Yeah, what you guys have talked about so far dovetails real well with what I have. I'm gonna do a screen share in a second.
Okay.
David, you mentioned opportunism. That's something that I think about a lot. And I mean, I try to be honest with myself, and I think that when I was thinking about what I wanted to say today, if I'm honest with you guys, I gotta say, I think we're all opportunists. Someone's got pain, they come, with their guitar's worth of pain, and we're going to profit from that. And they're in a bad spot, and we're going to make money off of that. And I think that's part of what I'm going to be addressing today, is how do we kind of come to terms with that? Because I think that gets in the way of that produces a lot of guilt for a lot of us, and that gets in the way of us pricing, kind of not thinking about that as being our burden or liability. I got to say, this is my favorite topic, so I want to first start by saying thanks for having me. This is really cool. The second headline that I want to present to everybody, especially those who might be thinking they might want to go watch football, is I've increased my revenue. I think the last time I checked, it was close to 40% in the last year. And I want to tell you guys how I did that. Mostly, it started with Doug's talk that you did originally, the business talk. Took a lot of that to heart, thought a lot about that. and then thought about the trade in general of Luthery. You know, I've been a clinical social worker for 30 years, and that's really the bulk of my work experience. And my shop, repair shop, is 10 years, and I have no real formal training. I've, you know, learned by watching people. You know, I never did you know, any kind of work in anybody else's shop, learning. It's all just from here, really, and other, you know, YouTube videos and things like that, and trial and error. So there's a tremendous, I think psychology has a lot to say about loothing, because I think loothing can really be a trap for people in a lot of ways. So I came up with a 4-page document yesterday to kind of walk you guys through how I did this, and some of it's, you know, honestly probably going to be offensive to some of you, or at least distasteful. Just feel free to ignore it. You know, take what you want.
Now.
You know, scroll through, take what you want, and I'll pass this document on to people, and I posted by email in the chat. You can email me, or if Ian or Doug want to post it to the website, they can. But let's see. So I think I figured out.
What kind of offensive are we talking about here?
Well, you have to wait, Ian.
Okay.
Yeah, can I get outraged already? Can I get pre-outraged?
It sounds like it's going to be a mission statement.
Oh, how did you guess that?
Or a manifesto. We got hammers and sickles.
You guys are stealing my thunder, man.
Might as well get a manifesto going.
Well, it is. You guys are right. All right. Can everybody see this?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Oh, it is a mission statement. That's not.
It is a mission statement, and it, you know, that's you know, great minds do think alike. All right, so I won't read the whole thing to you. Like I said, you guys can. This is as much a guide for me today as it is for you. But I am about making profit, and you know, I part of the crisis Doug was referencing was some guilt. You know, in social work, I always tell myself and tell my clients that I would never ask any of my clients to do anything that I wasn't willing or hadn't already tried to do myself. So my family is constantly, you know, guinea pigs for techniques and ideas I have about how, you know, how to deal with human interaction. And emotion is, you know, in clinical social work, a lot of the training is about how to deal with your own feelings about what you're hearing and about what you're dealing with. So I've definitely been thinking about that a lot in my repair work. So,
but by the way, profit, by definition, is not a 4-letter word.
Right.
Literally,
Yeah, that's kind of what this first paragraph is really about, is, you know, some of the things that we've kind of thought of as being bad, like wealth, you know, a lot of times we find ourselves saying things to ourselves or our customers like, hey, I'm not getting rich here, as if that would be a bad thing if you did accumulate wealth. Anyway, so you can kind of read the mission statement. This mission statement is kind of work in progress for me. It's kind of a, you know, to kind of guide my thoughts about, you know, why am I here? What is the purpose of the shop? And you know, what are some of the reasons there? Some of these factors, I you know, putting this stuff down on in a document was good for me too, just to kind of confirm some things I've been thinking and maybe get me thinking about new things too. Something David was talking about a minute ago is what I'm talking here about with this unusual skills. Like, there's a lot of things that I've learned in the 10 years I've been here that are different about my shop, and maybe not unique, but certainly unusual. And I've also had, you know, during that 10 years, the opportunity to see what other shops are up to, because I end up fixing other people's, you know, they took it somewhere else and then ended up here somehow. And so I get to actually see the work that other shops are doing. And I'm kind of surprised, especially in the beginning, like, wow, I was worried if my work was really going to measure up, but it turns out it actually exceeds a lot of what's going on out there. So that was important for me to learn. So I think a lot about like, what is the specific purpose and then what are artifacts? Things that happen as a result, but not necessarily like, I'm not, my mission statement isn't about, Ian and I joke a lot about ratings and how worthless they are and, Google and such, but, my mission statement deliberately doesn't include, I want to be the highest rated shop or, uh, part of why I was having this crisis is I had too many guitars in here and I needed to figure out, how to manage that. It was ridiculous. Since I opened, there used to be like 8 other shops around here. I live in the DC area, in the Northern Virginia suburbs of DC, and they all closed. And that was pretty much before, maybe right at the beginning of COVID, for various reasons, including death, retirement, um, moving on to different kinds of jobs, all kinds of reasons. So, and one guy moved and basically handed me his entire business. He just referred all his old customers to me, and anyone calling him after he moved, he sent here. So that got overwhelming. I needed to figure out what to do with that without, feeling guilty. Um, some of this, most of this is pretty self-explanatory.
So I want to try to let me jump in here and try to steer you to a couple of things that I want to hear you talk about.
Well,
go ahead.
I might be talking about that at the end. So
Okay.
I'll say there's definitely going to be like a psychology part to my talk. I wanted to just I thought people might be curious as to how I increased the income. So
That's what I was just going to ask you. How you turn
oh
things.
yeah, sure. Let's bump over to that. And anybody can read this document whenever they want. These are just the first section is just kind of little hints about things. I will say I don't answer my phone. I have my Apple Watch set to send a text in response to all calls. I'll text them back later when I can. Send me an email, and that gets rid of. I needed to get rid of customers, and I needed a fast and easy way to do that. And so I found, kind of accidentally, that if you tell people that you only do scheduling by email, most of them will go away, which turned out to be a good thing. I'll talk a little bit more about that. One of the things. Here we go. And you guys have kind of alluded to some of this, but I needed to set up a minimum fee. Here's something that I hadn't heard you guys talk too much about, and I have, kind of like you, Doug, I have kind of strong feelings about some of this stuff. I realized when I was typing all this up. The way that I decide about how to price a job really is I started thinking more about what it's worth to me. Like, this is going to be a pain in the ass. You guys are all way faster than I am. I can't do a refret in any kind of, even close to the amount of time. So I finally decided, thanks to Doug, when you said, hey, you're doing too much free work. And I know you've talked a lot with other people about that. I decided, I need to not take such a hit when I do a refret. It was costing me too much money. So I decided, what if I were to charge, the same hourly for that as for anything else, basically. That basically doubled or more the price that I was charging. And I decided I was okay with people just going elsewhere. There's not a whole lot of people around here who do refrets anyway. So that kind of led to this next paragraph about don't make a decision for the customer. I got a lot of people coming in here wanting me to do work on guitars that is going to way exceed the value of the guitar, but they have sentimental value or they just like to spend money. And I look outside at the car they drove up in and I see they have money, and they tell me about the 30 guitars they have at home. And I realize they have a lot of money. So I let them decide where they want to spend that money. And that seems to be a lot different than what a lot of folks are doing. So I thought I'd put that in there. Again, some of this is kind of overlapped with what's already been talked about. Here's
So
something.
let me ask you a question to go back to that
Yeah.
part of the conversation, because I remember a period of time where, say, as it relates to refrets, that you expressed a frustration to me that said, well, if I try to price myself based on what quote unquote the going rate for a refret is, $300, $400, $500, I'm going to take a beating on that because it takes me too long to do a refret to my satisfaction and to the satisfaction that I'm going to want to be able to present that to a customer. And the choice was stop doing refrets or charge, quote unquote, what you're worth, charge for your time. And the price of that refret increased by definition. It became okay that somebody said, that's okay, I'll go elsewhere. And the refrets that you did do, caused a significant increase in your income. Am I reading that right?
Yeah, yeah. Some of this just kind of comes with time. Recently, I had living in DC. There, I don't know if people realize, but there's a ton of musicians here who are employed by the federal government. They work for the Army, Navy, Marines have a band. There's several different bands and lots of musicians. And I've gotten to know them through gigging, but also through the shop. Anyway, the guitar player for the Navy band, the jazz ensemble, the Commodores, one of the like top name kind of groups in that category, came to me and said, "Hey, the Navy owns this ES 335. It needs a refret. Would you do it?" And of course, I said, "Yeah." I charged him the regular rate. The government paid for it. He had some other work done, but the whole thing was like $1,200, which basically for refret and a couple extra things. He was happy to pay that, and he was really thrilled with it. And he's a top player, and so that really helped me see kind of where my skills were and how far I've come, and got a lot more comfortable again with, oh yeah, I really do need to charge this. And people who don't want to or can't pay for that, that's okay. They can either not have it done, play one of their other 30 guitars, or go elsewhere. But one thing that really helped me bump up my income was two things. The next two things I'll talk about. The overtime rate. No one I've ever heard of on the Luthalong has an overtime rate. So what I decided to do a while back is kind of also I was still needing to cut back and slow the flow of incoming work. So I decided to have like a set amount of hours that I wanted to work a week, and then leaving a little bit of room, like if I wanted to work extra. I know a lot of you guys work, way more than 40 hours. If I wanted to work more than 40 hours in a week, here's what that would be worth to me. And so I developed an extra rate. If someone really needs something fast, here's what it'll cost, and let them decide. Again, that same principle. And it's gone really well, like better than I thought it was going to go.
So what you're referring to is an overtime rate, and how you decide who pays that has more to do with the people who are that's what some would, I guess, refer to as an emergency bench fee.
Yeah, rush charge.
Yeah, but the way I have it structured is a little bit different than that. So I have two queues, and this has worked out really well. The other thing I had heard a lot of talk about is the waiting list. And so in my therapy practice, I used to keep a waiting list, but by the time I called them back, I just wasn't getting enough openings because people were, I can only see so many people a week. And I eventually stopped the waiting list because they had long since found somebody else, and it was kind of silly to even have one. So I thought about that, and how would that apply with guitar work? And I decided, well, again, with that whole spirit of let them decide, and also based on necessity, I decided I'm just going to use my calendar to schedule. And so I scheduled X amount of new instruments to work on each week as my standard queue. And then if they wanted to not wait, and that standard queue, by the way, filled up real fast. So real fast, I was at a 3-month wait. And I decided to let that queue just kind of work itself out. So I wasn't sure I was kind of curious, how long are people willing to wait to have their guitar worked on? And I was super nervous when I first started doing this, because I thought there's no way people are going to wait this long, but I didn't have any other choice. And sure enough, I've been doing this about a year now, I think. And regularly people are fine dropping off 3 to 4 months from now, if it saves them a few bucks, because they're not in a big rush and they have 30 other guitars. So my standard queue is usually 4 months wait. And then I have this expedited, that's usually like 3 to 4 weeks. But if someone, like I had someone who was on tour, their parents happened to be there, they're from here. So the dad brought back the broken headstock guitar and dropped it off here and said, the tour stops in Baltimore in 10 days. Can you get this done? I said, well, I'd have to shut my shop down to do that and just work on your guitar. Here's what that would cost. And I remember telling Doug, I was all proud of my pricing. Oh, this is great. I'm going to make all this money. And Doug, first thing you said, I don't know if you remember this, you're like, yeah, you didn't charge enough. I was like, damn, I thought I did it right. Yeah. That was pretty funny, but I felt good about the pricing. And I decided, that's what it'd be worth for me to shut my shop down. And like Ian says, you're paying me to tell people bad news that it's going to even be longer. What's that worth to me? That, miserable conversation. I also stopped doing like hard promises on turnaround time. I tell people more like, I think it's going to be this, but I can't promise anything. And kind of what Nate did recently, like with that one project he had where, it's going to be a lot of money and it's going to take me a long time. And I don't know how much money or how long, but I've been taking that approach for a while and it's worked well.
Andy had a question for you. Do you have the days for drop-offs, and can people book their own appointment online, or is it?
The second one is no. I don't do online booking. I don't have a website. So I just do it through my Google Calendar, basically. And I try to limit my drop-off times because those are huge time suckers. I have my shop info sheet that I'll get to in a minute. That has lots of great information for customers, and it again gets most people to go away, which is kind of the goal. Also, it's not a stated goal, but it was something that needed to happen. So like on Tuesdays is my one full day in the shop. So preferably Tuesday mornings are my drop-off days, but pretty much any morning if somebody can come by. I try not to have people do drop-offs midday because it interrupts the flow. You guys who've seen me on the Looth along, I'm constantly like running around and I barely see anything during the day because, I'm trying to like get through a lot of work because I often, for reasons to do with family schedule too, I have like chunks of time, like maybe an hour or two, sometimes 3, other than Tuesdays. Anyway, so the standard drop-off queue has worked real well, and the expedited has worked well, and been surprised about how many people have been willing to pay, the $150 an hour for that.
So I want to pull you to another part of the conversation here. The psychology of pricing your work.
Yeah, which is what I'm pulling up here on my sheet here.
Okay, I want to try to focus the conversation a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, can you speak to what the psychology of mispricing your work is?
Yeah, it's up on the screen now.
Okay.
And when you say mispricing, I don't want to assume what you mean.
Not charging.
Pricing too low, yeah. So take a look at what I came up with here. Again, I should also say a big driver for this that's led to success is my wife. I got to credit her a lot. She has an accounting degree and she works in the finance end of the company. So she's dealing all day long. She's like the spreadsheet queen. She does these hugely complex spreadsheets, and her job basically is to ask the hard questions in her company, like, do we really need to spend on that? Does that make sense? Are we really making enough money to afford these kinds of fairly lavish things that they like to do at the corporate level? So she that's trickled down, and she helps me with conversations about how to decide. But so she'll ask tough questions too, and I try to ask myself the tough questions. And a lot of these questions I have here are self-esteem kind of questions. Why am I not charging more? And one of my favorites is this kind of middle of this paragraph. Ask yourself the miracle question. I love the miracle question. I use it in my sessions all the time, especially for people who aren't quite sure what the problem is. And so that's a technique where we say, if a miracle happened overnight and all your problems were solved, when you woke up in the morning, how would you know? What would be different? And for a lot of us, I think it would be being able to easily say, yep, that's going to be $1,500. without guilt, without, oh, are they going to pay that? Am I really worth it? At the end of the day, I'm just playing around with paint and glue and clamps, so like, when I try to answer that question of why am I not charging more, a lot of it was I didn't think people would pay. And so then I went back to my other idea about, well, why don't I let them decide what to pay? Let me price it again, what it's worth to me, throw the spaghetti at the wall and see what happens. And the more I was surprised that they were willing to pay, the more that became the answer to that question, why am I not charging more? Because I was afraid to. I was worried about rejection. I was worried about them saying, kind of reinforcing these ideas that I had, that I'm not worth it.
Well, is that something where somebody's projecting that on the customer? They'll price themselves low because they don't want to hear from the customer that, you're not worth it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah,
But that's
basically. That,
as
we're
as
worried
opposed.
that someone's going to say, that is way too high, and that's not worth it. You're not worth it. And that's when I really started to think more about, I need to be the one determining what I'm worth. And now I will say, so because I have, this is one business that I do, but I also have the other business. I have a lot of leverage and latitude that other loose, especially full-time ones, don't have, because that's your main revenue stream. So, but, it was like being on a high dive for the first time for a lot of this stuff for me. Like, are people really going to wait 4 months? Are they really going to pay that much more? When I first started doing this, I charged like $50 for a setup, and now I'm at, in a lot of cases, a lot closer to 200.
Alan, can I ask a question quickly?
Yeah, sure.
Did you the psychological problem of you, or that you have with thinking what you're worth, did you have that same problem as a psychologist?
Oh yeah, yeah. So there's a lot of parallels in both those jobs. A lot of therapists have the problem of just doubting their own value and their own worth, the imposter syndrome. Am I really? And some of it is because we take on too much responsibility for the well-being of our clients. Like, we're not going to cure people.
Can you stop sharing screen, because at this point I'd rather much see you talk than see what's
Sure.
on the screen.
Sure. I'm a little slow with this. Bear with me. Stop. There we go. Okay, I'm back.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt.
Nope. Let's see.
You were answering Bo's question.
Okay.
You're good.
Yeah, a lot of therapists have problems with imposter syndrome. I think that was your question. There's something else to it, though, right?
I know a few Loots who do too.
Yeah. Yeah.
So let me ask you one final question about the psychological aspects. When you're loothing and you're dealing with customers, how does one get to the point where they give themselves permission to say no? And that could be in one of two forms. Either, because there's two sides to that coin with a lot of loots, especially younger loots, because I know I got myself there too. You get yourself into trouble half the time because you took in a job that you had no business doing. And it winds up sitting in the corner of the shop until the customer's, ready to burn the building down because they want the guitar back, and you haven't touched it, because I ain't never done one of those before, and I shouldn't have said yes when it came in, because I didn't want to say, no, I'm not ready for that. Or I was afraid to turn the customer away because he might take his guitar somewhere else and I'll never see them again with their next guitar. The other side of it too is, no, I don't really like you very much, or I don't want to work on that guitar. Like David said, we don't work on ovations. Same thing here. We've solved that issue with price, because I don't see how anybody on the planet would spend the money they do at our shop on an ovation. But by the same token, I have a K over there that's getting a neck reset and a refret at our prices. But how does a Luth get to the point where on either side of that equation, how do they give themselves permission to say no and feel comfortable with it?
That's a great question. I'll be honest with you. I suck at saying no. So I had to find a workaround, and that's why I came up with my email method. I'm telling you, like, I think of the people that call now, I probably only take in 10% of those people as customers for various reasons.
If I just want to say, yeah, I suck at saying no too, but I do it anyway, and it's hard. That's what some people have to realize. For most people, it's not easy. It's just going to be hard. If you have empathy, it's hard. So just accept that you have to do hard things, and saying no can be one of them. So
I guess the best way to answer that. So I refer to other shops a lot, and when I do say no, it's usually I'll say, I think you'd be better off over down the street at Union Street. He's really a specialist in that, and that's usually how I take care of that.
Yeah, Alan, like never say no without a solution.
Yeah.
Whenever I say no to almost everything. I should have said no to Doug about this, but
it does make it a lot softer landing. You're right.
But yeah, it's just sort of you say no and you offer a solution, so everybody feels good at the end.
I'll tell you, Evan, I was never so upset in a doctor's office as I was during an appointment when the specialist I was seeing had no idea what was going on, and also offered no referral. I don't know what to do, and that was in the conversation. It was bizarre, but it was maddening. And so I remember that conversation when I'm having those kind of talks with customers here in the shop.
Well, Alan, that was great. Thank you.
I like that you guys are both wearing periwinkle too.
Hey, Alan, can I have 10 grand cash?
No.
Oh, see, he's got no problems. He could do it. Doug taught me how to say no like that. He taught me fast.
Alan, can I ask you one more question about about the kind of the self-esteem thing? One thing that I've thought about is, you went to school to be a psychologist, and it's a fairly serious degree, and you've got credentials hanging on the wall. For Loothing, like, you can go to Roberto Venn or Red Wing, and they certainly get your foot in the door, but there's really nothing that can hang on the wall that can really you can point to and go, see that that's why I get to say no. That's why I get to say $150 an hour. That's why I get to say these things. It does seem like we're kind of like adrift in lack of credential land.
That's true, but I think only in the formal sense. I know you and I have talked about like things like Google reviews and such, and I know in a lot of ways they're bullshit, but I go back and I read those reviews a lot, and it helps. And sitting with these conversations I have with customers, and I got a buddy who's like, whenever you do a job, take a minute to kind of sit and look at what you did, and that's kind of what I do after the customers left. Not just if they've left a review, but like the nice things they say, often like how easily they part with their money and they're still like really thankful, and as if it was kind of a hassle for me to have my time taken up with their measly $1,500 repair. And I try to really sit in the present with that kind of stuff, and not just move on to the next job, or certainly not to blow it off as, well, they don't know what they're talking about. This only took me 20 minutes, or it was no big deal, or it's just, CA glue and a razor blade and, a few shots of the airbrush and that kind of thing. I think we tend to minimize what we do, and find the flaws too. And rather than to kind of, look at it like when I'm doing cosmetic stuff, sometimes I'll let it sit for a couple of days and look at it again with fresh eyes and think, wow, that looks pretty good, especially, for what they're expecting.
Andy asked a question. He said, do you have any tips on a self-esteem method when those jobs come in you need to say no to, or you don't think you're good enough?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always good to ask yourself why. You know what? There's this technique that's used in cognitive behavioral therapy, and essentially, it's a worst case scenario kind of thing. Like a person's telling you, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be awful if this happens," and you say to the client, "Well, what if it does happen? Then what?" And well, then this would happen. All right, well, let's say that happens. Well, then what? You know, and you kind of going down layer to layer till you get to the bottom kind of core fear. What you know, what would happen if that worst thing happened? And usually the answer is they would go somewhere else. You know, like in mental health, you know, often where social workers are classically afraid of getting sued. Nobody sues social workers. You know, we have to carry malpractice insurance, but it's almost nothing because we never get sued. But I'm amazed, you know, especially younger ones. Oh, but what if they sue me? What if I lose my license? You know, it just doesn't ever happen.
Then you could become a luthier.
Yeah,
I'm gonna
Yeah.
it's more
I'm gonna
green.
I'm going to answer that question on the flip side of that coin, which is if you're struggling with a self-esteem problem because you're turning away work that you don't think you're good enough to do, there's an easy thing to do, which is get good enough. But that goes back to my um, my advice to Lutz about spending a lot of time practicing things you don't already do. You know, so if there's a technique you're interested in, if there's a style of job that you're interested in getting into, if I hear from Lutz all the time that, oh, I want to get into doing neck resets, or I'm doing like setups and mods and a little bit of light fretboard, but I really want to get into doing frets. And there's this, I don't know if I'm ready, or I don't know how do I get really good that people will want to bring me their guitars and let me start tearing frets out of them. The
Hey,
answer
Doug,
is do lots of refrets before.
there's another answer though, and this is the story of me trying to do a neck reset.
Mhm.
Ian was kind enough to try to coach me through that. I guess a couple of years ago now. At this point, I really wanted to learn, and I thought it would really, kind of be the last sector of this kind of work that I hadn't really tried. I tried it, and it was miserable. And when we stuck with it for a while, but I had a backup plan from the beginning. I knew another guy who could do it, and I could just sub it out to him if I needed. And I ended up doing that, and I learned a lot, especially like that I wasn't good at it, and I didn't enjoy it. And I realized when I asked myself, why did I feel the need to learn that? I realized I didn't have an answer. I'm plenty busy. I like the stuff that I'm already doing. There really wasn't a reason to start doing neck resets. And so, like, if you're feeling bad about, oh, but I should, I should learn this skill, I think it's okay to ask yourself, how come? Is it really critical? Do you really want to, or do you feel like you're supposed to, or you should?
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
I mean, we can't be experts at everything. Like, how many people do you know who are really good at soldering, really good at cosmetic work, really good at neck resets? Other than you, Doug, that's cheating.
Can I add a third side to this coin on Andy's question?
There's
Sure.
no three-sided coins.
Well, there is today because it's all about making money. So you get a three-sided.
Oh my God.
If you're starting at this business, and I mean like you're in your first 5-6 years, assume you're not good enough, because that's going to keep you sharp all the time. And I'm 25, 26 years in, and I don't think I'm good enough at it. And what I think is going to happen is the second it leaves my shop, it's going to go to a shop where somebody better than me is going to look at my work. That's how I work all the time, like mentally. What happens is the evidence piles up the longer you're doing this that you are good enough. So you get to ignore your own internal monologue about you telling yourself you're not good enough and just pay attention to the numbers. So that's just kind
Let me
of
interrupt. Before I forget, let me interrupt you because that reminds me of something. So a lot of the therapy work I do is called cognitive behavioral therapy. That has to do with the relationship between thoughts and feelings. And one of my favorite techniques there is called examine the evidence. It's great. You can use it all over the place, and it certainly applies here. If you're worried about something, is there evidence to the contrary that you're ignoring because you're focusing on something small? I mean, I think it's good for us to challenge ourselves to always try to be better, but I think we have to be real careful about, Evan, you got a lot of confidence, and I know you're a confident guy, and you know where you sit in the food chain in New York City, nonetheless. So, like, people listening might not be in that position to be able to really approach it like you are without feeling it like shit.
Right. But what I'm saying is, I can't go into work thinking that I'm the best at what I do. Certainly not, because if I do that, I'm going to get cocky, right? When I get cocky, that attitude is going to come out to my customer that I'm, Mr. Know-it-all. And that's when I'm going to fail. And that's when it's going to come back at me. And I'm going to say to myself, well, why did I put that attitude on when, look at my work. I don't know what the hell I'm doing. So I think that
I don't like, of all the people here today, even the most experienced are probably not in that category of arrogance of, I'm the best.
Right. But I'm taking that as an extreme. Sort of where when you say, am I good enough to do this? What happens eventually is, like with the way I learned how to do everything I do, is I didn't try and take it in, it came in. And that's what needed to happen. Like, in other words, my first refret, the guy didn't come in and say, I want to get a refret. I was working on his guitar and I was like, oh my God, this guy needs
Yeah.
So, and then I was like, okay, let me figure out how to do a refret. And so you do it without that sort of, I'm taking something in that I might not be ready for. It's, this is the time that you're ready for it because it's here. Do you know what I mean?
That reminds me of one answer real quick. The first not the first, maybe like the third refret I did, I decided I'm going to take it to the best guitar player that I know, a guy that I played with who's fantastic, and ask him what he thinks of it. And if he likes it good enough, I'm going to have him make a video, which he did, which I used. I'm also a pretty shameless self-promoter, but I wanted to know, I knew he would tell me the truth if it wasn't right. And, so either I was going to get some good feedback about that. So that's something like, if a person's self-doubting, take it to someone and see what they think, if it's about a refret or.
Totally.
Yeah.
I'm gonna push back a little bit on that. Not what Alan said, forgive me, but in the sense that I learned early, and I've told this story before, but I learned early on, as somebody who was completely self-taught, that if I wasn't prepared to do something to a customer's guitar because I didn't know how, that to me is where preparation takes hold. I did no less than over the 3.5 month period when I was in college, no less than 60 refrets on junker guitars that I bought before I accepted the first customer refret that I did, because I'm a firm believer in not practicing on customer guitars. They didn't come to me and offer to pay me money so I could learn how to do something to their guitar that I've never done before. They came to me and said, my guitar is effed up, can you fix it? And if I'm going to say yes, I have to have the confidence in my abilities to say, I know how it's going to turn out. That to me is all important. And I don't mean to contradict what somebody else is saying here, but I think I do think, especially with young cats in this business, that there's a tendency to short shrift the learning part, which is why I set aside 50% of the hours I'm working, more so when I was younger. Now I'm spending more time, of that 50% doing stuff that I want to do, like coming up with tools, but I still practice techniques.
I'd like to push back on your pushback a little bit, and in a way I don't think you'll disagree with. You'll probably it's almost more to clarify that you should feel okay exploring new ranges on customer instruments if you have a good sense of reasonable increments that you're raising your skill level by. Going from having never done a neck reset to saying, sure, I'll take this, 30s Martin and reset the neck on it is something. But if it's something slight, it's hard to me to think of examples, but something with electronics where you're good at soldering and you have reasonable skills with this, but you've never done this particular arrangement or worked on a hollow body before. I think it's okay to make reasonable small increments.
Oh, I agree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But the first time you've plugged in a soldering iron into the wall shouldn't be when you're hovering over somebody's guitar.
Agreed. Yep. But of course, this is coming from a person where the last band I played in, we never practiced once without getting paid. We never practices.
So to clarify, I actually threw up in the middle of that refret. That is no joke. I actually just walked outside the shop and threw up, and then came back in and finished.
That answers Sharon, because she wanted to know if it was in the sound hole or not.
No. Put it this way: it was a simple one. It was a rosewood fretboard strap, and the customer. This was 25, longer than that, years ago. He's still my customer.
That's fine, and I'm not saying that you're wrong. I don't.
No. But with neck resets, Doug, I bought guitars and reset the necks before I took in a guitar from a customer, because I knew that was a whole other thing.
So I've talked to young guys who are working in a music store. They're doing setups, they're doing pickup swaps, they're putting hardware on a guitar and that kind of thing. And I'll get and I've done lots of one-on-one sessions with lutes, learning how to crown frets, learning how to level frets, and all of that type of stuff. And the subject comes up. I'm getting ready for my first refret with a customer's guitar that's coming in, and I'll cringe, and I'll say, you don't want to do that, because everything that could go wrong when you start pulling frets and you're not experienced, you then have a lot of explaining to do to a customer. I'm not suggesting that everybody has to do 50 or 100 refrets and have them under their belt before they do their first, but you got to do one before you start charging people money for it.
Weren't we talking about pricing a few minutes ago?
We were, yes.
Speaking of which, we should probably get on to Evan and his magical periwinkle shirt.
Yes, let's talk to Evan about pricing.
Okay.
Thank you,
Alan.
Alan.
I'll make mine quick, but I sort of tuned out when you guys were talking. So can you repeat yourself? No. It's funny. I'm just going to talk sort of about a little more organic history of pricing and how I figured stuff out. It's never lost on me that I'm in New York City, so there is a larger client base than where some of you people are. But this system may work for you. What I did was, the first 2 years that I was open, I didn't pay attention to having any sort of financial goal. I was just terrified of going out of business. I came from working in a music store for 5.5 years, and I opened up my own shop, and it was like, I was just like the whole fucking time. My wife would do charts of my business model, like my numbers. And after 2 years, I couldn't really internalize it, but the evidence was piling up that I wasn't imminently going out of business. So what I did was, I made a bunch more money the second year than the first year. Then what I did was I said, I'm going to set a goal of how much money I want to make and how much money do I need to live. And I like to live comfortably. And we were on basically a single income because my wife wasn't really, she's a filmmaker. So at the time, she wasn't really making money. So I said, how much money do I need to make for both of us in order for us to live as well as we would like to? So I set this number. Sadly, I did not hit it the third year of business. I was off by about 20 grand. So I was like, damn it. So I raised my prices. I've hit that goal for the last 16 years now. And what happens is, and I've raised my prices clearly since then, but I haven't changed my goal, because my goal was a number that still lets me live comfortably. So what happens is I hit that goal every year earlier. And then I relax a little bit, because I'm not trying to make the most money in the world. What I'm trying to do is to live comfortably in a lifestyle that I can afford. and still have money going from my retirement and do whatever I want to do, which pretty much we're able to do. What that did was it took a lot of pressure off of me. What that did also was it sort of set how I price myself. In other words, I stopped doing larger repairs years ago because I realized that I could do X amount of small repairs and make more money than if I did a smaller X amount of small repairs and a X amount of large repairs. So I looked at the numbers, and when I stopped doing neck resets, I made more money. When I stopped doing structural acoustic repairs, I made more money. 3 years ago, maybe, I stopped doing full refrets except for customers of mine who are grandfathered in. Like, in other words, I've been working for them for 20 years. I've made more money every year than the year before for the last 3 years. I hit my goal during COVID. So it's what you do is you figure out your business model that works for your lifestyle. And it goes to what Doug said. Basically the first thing he said is, I don't care what other people charge. I charge what works for me. And this is what works for me. And what happens is it comes out that I might be a little less expensive than some of the people in New York City, but I'm not paying attention to them. It doesn't matter to me.
You're looking at it from the standpoint of you're cherry picking those repairs that you have the highest margin in.
Well,
Is that a way of looking at it, or no?
Yeah, put it this way, the highest margin, and another thing, which is a whole other business practice, is least amount of risk and vulnerability. Because what happens is, I have 8,000 customers. I've probably pleased 7,850 of them. Mm-hmm. So that means there's 7,850 people around saying that go to Evan, he's amazing. There's 150 people around who, hopefully they're not still holding a grudge. I don't know, and saying shitty stuff about me every day. But
Evan, do you think
they're down in
get to a
Washington?
point?
They're down in Washington Square Park, all holding signs.
I know. That's why I moved
We
up
hate
town.
Evan. We hate Evan.
Evan, do you think you'll ever get to a point where you're only replacing output jacks?
Oh my God, that's the dream. That's dare I dream that? No. But what happens is I take in something complicated when I want to take in something complicated to remind me that I actually know what I'm doing and I like doing certain things.
Mm-hmm.
But and that's where I'm having fun with the job. The day-to-day stuff, while it's not grueling and impactful on my soul, it is, if you guys know me on the Luthalong, I'm on at 7:30 in the morning with the guitar, because that is my lifestyle. Is I wake up super early and what I did find, though, is once I raised my prices, I could work on less guitars per year and still hit my goal. So I worked on 200 less guitars last year than I did the year before, but I made more money. So, it's figuring out that equation that works for you and really insulating yourself from the industry, other than what your part of the industry and your customer relations are. Like Doug said, is just don't pay attention to what other people charge. Just pay attention to what you need to charge in order to make your life work.
You're coming to that same conclusion from a qualitative standpoint as opposed to a quantitative standpoint.
Exactly. What it is no, it's more, I look at it as more of a survivalist standpoint. And how do I, with my psyche, survive this job? In other words, how do I make this least impactful on me psychologically? And so what Alan said a little earlier was that, what jobs do I have to take in to still feel good about myself as a luthier, right? Remember you said something about that? If I wasn't taking in neck resets, am I still?
Oh, right.
Yeah, I'm like, fuck that. You know what the thing to be proud of is longevity. That is the only thing. If you have a good reputation, you've been doing this a long time, that is the win. Everything else is just feeding something where you think you're inadequate. The rest of it is the longevity of your business and the success of your business model. If you stay the course of a business model for X numbers of years and it continues to be successful, that to me is what Alan was talking about earlier, sort of sort of proof of concept rather than however you feel about yourself. You can always say, well, yeah, I haven't done a neck reset in 15 years. Am I really like as good as anyone here on this Looth-along? And then I say to myself, yeah, but I've run a successful business for 20 years, so I'm probably doing okay.
I think that speaks to the core of the issue of like, why are people keeping their prices low? Because they're thinking, well, am I really a luthier? If I can't make an acoustic guitar from scratch, which I'll never be able to do, what does that say about the rest of my business? And I finally realized nothing. It just means that, I call Bo or someone else, any number of you guys who know how to do that and do that.
Well, it's like what Dave Collins said, is like, we are service providers. And, when he used the term plumber, I have said this to my customers before. They say, are you a luthier? And I'm like, no, I'm just a plumber with slightly less visible ass crack. That's, that's it.
Well, on that note,
Anyway,
I like to end every meeting with the word ass crack. So I think
Especially from that.
Do we want to open this up for questions at all? Does anybody have any questions?
we can.
I saw some questions in the chat, but I wasn't keeping up with them.
Can we get more ass crack?
That's your question?
That's a question. Hey, Doug, can you
going
mute
off the
Ed for
rails
me?
super quick.
And somebody asked a question about charging for emergency repairs. It looks like Alan has that really well thought out and built into his whole thing. I thought that was actually kind of awesome. I've never done it. I build time in my schedule to do emergency repairs for my regular customers, or if just something is small enough to where it fits in what my construct is of what I do.
I want
have
to
that.
say one thing about that. Can I say
have
one
that
thing about
incorporated in my shop.
what's that?
I said I have that incorporated in my shop because I do have like a lot of bands and a lot of people that have emergency repairs. So if I have to disrupt the 5 or 6 benches that I have set up for somebody's work, no different than like a mechanic. If I got to take that car off that hoist, you're going to compensate me for it.
Right.
So that's something I do incorporate in my shop.
I do not.
I'm overpriced, that I'm not the guy for you, right, Doug? That's what you taught me.
Of course, but I don't charge for emergency repairs because, to quote Evan, I don't think there is such a thing as a guitar emergency.
Here's when they got to
there's
play.
that.
Here's when they got to play the
however,
next night on stage.
Well, no,
Yeah.
I do have customers who come
prof-
to me and say,
Professionals have backup guitars. Period.
professionals have backup guitars. We also maintain a fleet of loaner guitars so
That's
that when
nice.
the customer says,
Cool.
I have to have a guitar for tomorrow night's gig, I can say, here, you can borrow this one. Well, no, I have to have my guitar for tomorrow night's gig. Well, then you don't really have an emergency. You're just being a prima donna. So I'm not interested in doing that repair.
That's a big part of why I came up with that pricing structure, because I found that people were, they wanted their emergency to be my emergency, and I said, well, that comes with a cost, and suddenly their emergency wasn't emergent anymore.
Yeah.
My answer to customers is I haven't been in a hurry since 1972, so that's too bad.
We had a rush charge at the place I was working at in Brooklyn, and I realized I'm not working any faster. You're paying me to make excuses to the guy that was here before you.
Yeah.
And it sucks. There's a hefty fine for me to get on an email and tell somebody why their guitar isn't done, and that it's because a relative died or something like that. It doesn't feel great.
Danny wanted to know what happened in 1972 when you had to hurry.
That's the subject for an entirely different.
Yeah. I bet it.
I got something just to add in, if that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah. So when it comes on to the emergency things, the only kind of like rush jobs I tend to do are for the guitar shop that I do loads of work for. And for the longest time, I was giving them preferential rates because they were sending me loads of work. And at one point, I then realized that they're the guys with loads of money.
Well, so
running like a multi-million pound like nationwide chain of stores, and I've become their tech.
Well,
And
you
actually,
talked about
their jobs are now more profitable than anybody else's, whereas they used to be least profitable. Because I'm now able to turn around and just go, right, I will put you in, but you are being charged a half an hour job, even if it's a 15-minute jack socket change, whatever. And like every time I've put my prices up to them, they've never batted an eyelid. And I walked into the shop and somebody asked me, how much would it cost to fit a K&K? I was like, oh, yeah, like 50 quid. Like, oh, the last guy used to charge us 100. I was like, right, well, every time I'm gonna do that, I'm now gonna charge you 100 quid to fit a K&K. So it was that standpoint of understanding that yes, they need it done quickly. Yeah, they're sending me a load of work. They have my business cards out. They're preparing people. They're taking in work, but to be able to turn around and say, you give me this batch of work on a Monday and I will have it back to you by Friday. I just absolutely, they get pushed through the net, and they're faster, but they're getting charged out probably a little bit more, but they can soak it up. They're just worried about how much it's hitting their margin. And I now have the conversations with them. They bring in guitars and they ask me now, because I've become expensive, should we be buying this one in? I'm like, yeah, buy this in, but if I fix it for you, it's going to cost you X amount. And if that doesn't hit their margin too hard, I can actually make money out of it.
Okay.
Hey guys, I gotta go. Sorry.
Yeah, we should probably save some for the next meeting. Everybody, unmute and thank everybody except for me involved, because it would be self-serving. But
That was fantastic, gentlemen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah, you're
thank
welcome.
Thank you.
guys. Another good one.
Thank you.
Good stuff.
Thanks, guys.
Great.
All right.
Good to see you all.
Thank you for
Oh,
participating.
hi,
everybody.
Dan.
Hey, Dan.